temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental mode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Dharma pujita kaitruvotra paramo nirmatsanam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu shivadam tapa trayon mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kimva Purir Ishwaraha Sadyo Hridi Avarudyate Tra Kriti Bihi Sususabis Takshanat. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is distinguished from illusion. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God. It's sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam sukha mukad amritam dravya samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam muhur aho rasika bhuvi bhavikaha. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8, verse number 40. And these are the prayers by Queen Kunti Devi, and she continues, all these cities and villages are flourishing in all respects because the herbs and grains are in abundance. The trees are full of fruits, the rivers are flowing, the hills are full of minerals, and the ocean full of wealth. And this is all due to your glancing over them. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Human prosperity flourishes by natural gifts and not by gigantic industrial enterprises. The gigantic industrial enterprises are products of a godless civilization, and they cause the destruction of the noble aims of human life. The more we go on increasing such troublesome industries to squeeze out the vital energy of the human being, the more there will be unrest and dissatisfaction of the people in general, although a few only can live lavishly by exploitation. The natural gifts, such as grains and vegetables, fruits, rivers, the hills of jewels and minerals, and the seas full of pearls, are supplied by the order of the Supreme. And as he desires, material nature produces them in abundance, or restricts them at times. The natural law is that the human being may take advantage of these godly gifts by nature, and satisfactorily flourish on them without being captivated by the exploitative motive of lording it over material nature. The more we attempt to exploit material nature according to our whims of enjoyment, the more we shall become entrapped by the reactions of such exploitative attempts. If we have sufficient grains, fruits, vegetables, and herbs, then what is the necessity of running a slaughterhouse and killing poor animals? A man need not kill an animal if he has sufficient grains and vegetables to eat. The flow of river waters fertilizes the fields, and there is more than what we need. Minerals are produced in the hills, and the jewels in the ocean. If the human civilization has sufficient grains, minerals, jewels, water, milk, etc., then why should it hanker after terrible industrial enterprises at the cost of the labor of some unfortunate men? But all these natural gifts are dependent on the mercy of the Lord. What we need, therefore, is to be obedient to the laws of the Lord and achieve the perfection of human life by devotional service. The indications by Kunti Devi are just to the point. She desires that God's mercy be bestowed upon them so that natural prosperity be maintained by His grace. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We can see how far, by reading this, we can see how far modern civilization has deviated from the instructions of Krishna. What we have today is a travesty of what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to be working in big industrial complexes. We're supposed to be living according to the natural laws established by Krishna. So it says here that he mentions this natural law. First of all, he says, the natural law is that the human being may take advantage of these godly gifts by nature and satisfactorily flourish on them without being captivated by the exploitative motive of lording it over material nature. So, modern science and modern philosophy and modern education are all pointing toward the exploitative mindset of lording over material nature. And that is the cause of suffering in life. How can we exploit nature for our selfish desires when nature doesn't belong to us? Who does nature belong to? It belongs to Krishna. Everything belongs to Krishna. He's Bhuktaram Yakitapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. He is the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices. Therefore, yajnata karmano nyatra lokamam karma bandhanai tadartam karma konteya muktasanga samachara. All sacrifices and all acts of human beings should be directed toward pleasing the Lord. So when we come into the material world with the desire to dominate nature and exploit it for our own sense gratification, we become a thief. What happens to thieves? They're punished. What is the punishment? Birth, death, old age, and disease. And repeated infinitely until the spirit soul wakes up and understands that this whole type of civilization is wrongly directed. And it's actually the misfortune that living entities become convinced through modern education, through speculative works, philosophical books, and through gigantic exploitative industries. You can see what happened in India, and it happened in the United States also. The United States followed the lead of England. England had the Industrial Revolution first. And then the United States imitated England, stole some of England's secrets. What was the secrets? Well, England produced the industrialized making of cloth and clothing. Back in the 1830s and 40s, they were able to make machines out of iron that could make a massive amount of fibers or strings, or take cotton that they brought from India and turn it into thread, but not with the charka, the spindle. They industrialized it with machinery, and therefore they could produce cloth very cheaply and very fast, and then export it, the dhotis and the saris and all these things, back to India and exploit the people. So this went on for 100 years, and England was getting richer and richer by exploiting the Indians. Not only the Indians, but all their colonies. And what did Gandhi do? He realized, let's try and stop the robbing of Indian cotton by the British. The British were taking the cotton for virtually nothing. And because they had control of the open seas, they had the most powerful navy in the world at that time. And they were taking everything to Manchester, and in Manchester, England, they had these big industries of making cloth. So at the same time, the United States, when it first started, didn't really have, the government didn't really have any money. The only way they could make money, they had no taxes at that time. It was not permitted by the Constitution to tax the people, because that's why they revolted against the British, because the British were taxing the Americans. They had the tea tax. So there you have the famous Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party, where they seized a British ship and threw all the tea into the ocean, right? Because they made a statement that we're not going to pay your taxes. Why should we pay your taxes? You're exploiting us. So, but when they finally got independence, the only way they were allowed to make money from the Constitution of the United States was by taxing imports. So, but they were not allowed to tax the people at that time. They could tax the imports. So, therefore, in order to overcome that, they had to figure out how to make these mills like the British. So they bribed people in England, and there were some people in England who felt that they also were being exploited by the British government. So some of those people came to the United States and gave them the secrets of how they could build these industrial machines to make thread, and then put the thread together to make cloths. And now the United States started, because they actually stole. They did what the Chinese have been doing to us for many years. They stole the intellectual property, right? The secrets of how to make these machines, and started making cloth in the United States and clothing and so forth. So you see, it's not that the Chinese were the first to steal intellectual property. The United States was the first to steal intellectual property from the British. And in this way, they started building these big industrial, cloth-making factories in the United States. And if you see old pictures, you'll see that there's thousands of women working in a factory making cloth in the United States, in New York, and a few other places. It mostly was in New York at that time. And even up until today, New York is a major place for making clothing. But it's vastly diminished because of the competition from the Chinese and other countries where the labor is less expensive. But before, everyone was working in these big factories making clothing because people needed clothing, right? Okay, so the more we attempt to exploit material nature according to our whims of enjoyment, the more we shall become entrapped by the reaction of such exploitative attempts. If we have sufficient grains, fruits, vegetables, and herbs, then what is the necessity of running a slaughterhouse and killing poor animals? A man is, why do they eat meat? Because you just let the animals graze on grass, right? And they become fat, and then you kill the animal and eat it. You don't have to, plant the seeds and harvest the wheat and then thresh the wheat, separate it from the outer covering. So it's a lot of work, and to do it in a large scale, it requires a huge number of people or very expensive equipment like harvesters and bale tires and impacting the bales and then tying them up, and it's a huge amount of work, right? So it's much easier just to let the animals graze and then and kill them and eat them. You see, so the meat eaters, they have actually ruined the culture of America, because when you start killing animals, then a lot of violence becomes a natural thing and a prominent thing in society, because the animals will take their revenge and kill you in the next life. So unless they stop this meat eating, they're not going to stop all the violence that's going on. And look at all the violence. Every day there's murders in the United States. Right? Every day. And there's wars. The United Nations has not stopped any wars. Since after World War II, they said, that's it, no more wars. We'll sit down and talk this out in New York, right? That had no wars have stopped. In fact, there's more wars now. Instead of big wars, there's little wars going on, right? And they're always going on. So here we see that Prabhupada emphasized having farms and devotees living a self-sufficient life by growing their own grains, milk, vegetables, and fruits, and protecting the cows. A man need not kill an animal if he has sufficient grains and vegetables to eat. So, the flow of river waters fertilizes the fields. So that means that rivers naturally flood once a year, right? And rivers are coming from the mountains where the snow melts in the springtime, and then it comes down and it brings the minerals from the mountain. And then the rivers flood and they fertilize the field with those minerals. But what do? We want to build cities right on the bank of the river, and to stop the river from flowing, we make these embankments and we do all kinds of things so that the river flows straight. But rivers die when they flow straight. The natural rivers meander like this and create vortex energy by waves and vortex movement of the water. There's a whole science behind it. We won't go into it now, but there's a whole science behind it, why rivers remain healthy. But when rivers are forced to go straight and they cut all the trees on the banks of the water so there's no shade, eventually they die. They become dead rivers, right? And there's a lot of dead rivers now in the world because they've cut all the trees on the banks. They try and force the rivers to not flood, and so forth. And this is happening in India. It's happening massively in India and other places, and the United States also. So That's why the environmental movement has become so big, because people are making so many mistakes due to industrialization, and they're trying to control nature, and it's going against them. See, so environmentalism has become the biggest issue now. It's a political issue, and it's a health issue, and everyone's talking about it. And people are saying, we can't live on the earth anymore. You know, idiots. And say, you know, like Stephen Hawking, he was always saying, our future is in outer space. Yes, Steve, you go first and tell us what it's like on the moon or Mars. You know, then we might think of following you. You know, anyway, he's dead now, so he's not going anywhere. He went to hell. That's where he went. You know, a complete speculator. So Prabhupada says, but all these natural gifts are dependent on the mercy of the Lord. What we need, therefore, is to be obedient to the laws of the Lord and achieve the perfection of human life by devotional service. So when are we going to understand this? We have to understand, this is where Prabhupada is pointing to, that having self-sufficient life, depending on the mercy of the Lord and working honestly and developing all at the same time devotional service. You can attain perfection of human life by devotional service. That's what he's saying. You can't attain perfection of human life by increasing your 401k. You're going to eventually die, and you're not going to take any of it with you, right? You say, well, I'll leave it to my kids. Yeah, I had an uncle who, he didn't believe in banks or 401ks. He always used to hide his money somewhere in the house. And he was the cheapest guy in the world. He would have his wife cut his hair so he wouldn't have to pay for a haircut. He didn't buy furniture. He used to go and pick up boxes, wooden boxes in the stores, you know, because they get fruits and vegetables, and used to get in wooden boxes, not cardboard before. So he used to pick up those wooden boxes, bring them home, put some cloth on top of it, and that was the furniture. Whenever we used to go to his house, we used to sit on these wobbly boxes, you know. And I mean, the guy was cheap. It was cheap, and he saved a lot of money. He was the only guy that had money during the Depression in the United States. You know, everybody else was just struggling to eat. This guy had money, right? Because he was a penny pincher. He was cheap. And when he died, he and his wife, for some reason or other, couldn't have any children. That's another sign of being very sinful, when you can't have a child, and even if you have a child, you don't have a son. That's a sign that there's been some karmic reaction from the past. But it's even worse if you can't have any children, right? So he adopted a son, and the son turned out to be a complete nonsense. He did everything wrong, you know, and when the father died, all the money that he had went to the mother, and the son knew that. So what did he do? He really treated his mother bad, so that she died very quickly. And now he inherited all the money. And as soon as he got the money, at that time it was a lot of money. It was like $300,000. It was all cash. He got the money. In 1 month, he lost the whole amount of money. And the final insult to his father, with whatever he had left, he bought a racehorse who accidentally broke his leg and died. And that was it. He was homeless after that. He lost everything, you know. So this is what happens to people who ignore completely the purpose of life. The purpose of life is not to make a lot of money and spend it on sense gratification. Or like this uncle who was a stingy man, and he didn't even enjoy the money. And it ended up his kid wasted the whole thing in 1 month, or a couple months. He wasted the whole thing. There was nothing to show for all the sacrifice he made. So this is what's happening to us in different degrees. As long as we don't understand where we should be going in life, what we should be aiming for. See, now it's difficult to do this because this industrialization is so prevalent now, everywhere, including India. And people have been duped. They've been cheated out of their ancestral lands, and they're living in little apartments. They're contaminated. The water's contaminated. The food is contaminated. The milk is contaminated. Everything's contaminated now in India and the United States. In the United States, it looks better. It looks better, but it's contaminated just as bad as it is in India. See? And everything, the medicines, the household cleaning products, the supplements, the food, the air, the water, it's all contaminated because of this exploitation that's taking place. And just like the United States, in Flint, Michigan, right? The government, not some industry, the government contaminated the river and the water source of Flint, Michigan, and some people died, and then they can't drink the water anymore. And the government did it, not a factory, you see. And the government doesn't really want to do anything about it. So people are really upset, right? If you can read about it in the newspaper. It's not, this doesn't happen only in India. It happens in the United States regularly in different places where you can't drink the water, you can't breathe the air, you can't eat the food. It's all contaminated. So to go back to the clean type of life is not an easy thing. Even in Washington State, you have what's called Hanford. Hanford is where all the waste materials from the atomic bombs that they made is stored, and it's in Washington State, and the storage facility there is deteriorating, so all that radioactivity is going into the soil and into the water right now. So even Washington, which looks like a very clean place, right? People say, oh, it's clean air, there's a lot of trees there, but it's the storage place of a huge amount of radiation. Radiation takes at least 10 to 20,000 years to be broken down by nature, And if it leaks, they have it in these big barrels, and this is from World War II, right? So how many years is that? It's like 70 years ago. Those barrels are starting to rot, and the radiation is going out into the soil. So even here we're not safe. Now I'm not trying to alert everyone to get freaked out, but I'm just saying that we should work towards self-sufficiency. That there's no other sustainable model. There's no other, and it's not difficult if a large number of people put their mind to it. Going back to the original way of living in America as well as in India. Everyone was living on farms before. There were hardly maybe one or two big cities, and they were not like big like today. New York, up until about the Industrial Revolution, it only had a few thousand people living in there, right? And that was the biggest city. And then the Industrial Revolution came, and they stole that the secrets from England, and they started building these big factories and making big time money, and the farmers started moving to the cities to make easy money and so forth. So but you can turn it around. America is still a new country. It's a place, there's so much land that's not inhabited in the United States. You can buy farmland very cheaply in this country still. And you go back to the natural way of living. So what we need, therefore, is to be obedient to the laws of the Lord and achieve the perfection of human life by devotional service. The indications by Kunti Devi are just to the point. She desires that God's mercy be bestowed upon them so that natural prosperity be maintained by His grace. Natural prosperity. So we should think about this very seriously before we spend the rest of our life in factories. Even Microsoft is a factory, right? Yeah, there are all these places are factories. A large number of people in these little cubicles, all day long, and stressed, And the idea is we're making money, right? You're making money and you're dying quicker. that doesn't make sense. It's better not to make so much money and die slower and develop Krishna consciousness, right? Okay, so we'll stop right there. It's a big subject. It's a big subject. And you see, Prabhupada spent a lot of time explaining it, right? Why is he doing this? Because this is what he wants. This is what Krishna wants. He doesn't want people to be wasting their life working for other people and being exploited, right? Yeah, you get Crohn's disease, right? Carpal syndrome, yeah. Yeah. Okay, of course, Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavan.